Welcome to the Battles We Pick podcast, where advocates and organizers talk about the work of making social, political, and policy change. Today's guest, Memphis City Councilwoman Michalyn Easter-Thomas, got her colleagues to enact a driving equality ordinance soon after local police officers killed Tyree Nichols, who they'd stopped for a trivial traffic violation. Trained as an educator, Dr. Easter-Thomas is Director of Education Initiatives and Strategic Partnerships for the Memphis River Parks Partnership, in addition to serving as District 7's representative on the council. Besides police reform, she has tackled the issues of food deserts, city worker pay, reimagining neighborhood business districts, and cleaning up local waterways. I met Michalyn through a webinar sponsored by Local Progress. As you'll hear, that organization's network of local elected officials was crucial in helping her push for an ordinance to keep the Memphis police from using broken taillights or other minor infractions as pretext to pull drivers over and try finding other issues. For Tyree Nichols, such a traffic stop cost him his life. Through Local Progress, the councilwoman linked to a member of Philadelphia's city council who'd successfully shepherded a driving equality ordinance and whose technical support proved crucial. But aside from that vital legal advice on properly crafting the ordinance, I found it fascinating to hear Michalyn talk about how she handled the local politics and secured unanimous passage, even though her council colleagues pointedly left driving equality out of their package of reforms. I know you'll find her story fascinating too. Today we're lucky to have a local elected office holder as our guest to talk about her vital work on criminal justice reform and other issues. Michalyn Easter-Thomas has represented District 7 on the Memphis City Council since 2020 and is currently running for re-election for a second term. Councilwoman Easter-Thomas is an educator by training and has just completed her work for her doctorate. So I'm not sure whether to address her as councilwoman or doctor. Either way, I'm glad to have her as my guest. Thank you so much for appearing on the podcast.
Thank you, David, for inviting me.
I'm looking forward to it. As the backstory, a few months ago, I attended a webinar on creating real traffic safety put on by the group Local Progress, which made me want to hear more from the councilwoman about her efforts. As is the case all too often, this fight for justice was spurred by a terrible injustice, the January 2023 death of Tyree Nichols after Memphis police tased and beat him, an assault that started with a routine traffic stop. Such awful and barbaric treatment from officers who are supposed to, serve the community and keep everybody safe. A lot for us to talk about, but why don't we start right there? Tell us about the aftermath of this senseless death and getting started working on your driving equality ordinance, which was adopted some months later.
Yeah, David, we were in a sort of tailspin in the city of Memphis. All eyes were on us nationally, globally. I was getting a lot of communication and outreach from folks from everywhere about what's going on, what happened, what are y'all going to do about it? And quite frankly, I think that's where the eyes came from as well. I've never seen so many CNN cars and trucks and folks in my life trying to see what was the next step for Memphis. And as an elected official, someone that has the closest tie to the management, we're not the managers, but we have the closest tie to the management of MPD, our police department, because we control the budget. There was an instant thought for me of what can I do to ensure that, one, I understand what happened. Two, I understand how certain authorities are approaching the next steps. But three, what can I do to ensure that this doesn't happen again? Um, we were invited, city council members were invited to view the tapes. And I will say, David, that I never viewed I don't watch things like that. I don't have to I don't need
It's not
I don't
something you ever
need
want to see.
I don't need proof for you to tell me that something horrific happened. I'll believe you.
Right.
But I thought that as a representative, I had a responsibility to have seen with my own eyes and hear with my own ears on what happened. And so I watched those tapes, and I'm glad that I did because it allowed me to approach my quest for solutions in a more focused way. And so I instantly thought about the organizations that I was a part of that had other elected officials to see what could I do. What is something that would help us stop future occurrences like this one? And so I came across Local Progress. I was already a part of Local Progress, already involved, but I went to them and asked for suggestion. And they have um, policy manuals of sorts, what other progressives have done nationwide. And obviously, knowing that police brutality and death by the police is not a Memphis issue, right? It's not just akin to us. It's seen nationally for hundreds of years. And so I knew that it had to be someone else out there, progressive, that had tried to do something to curtail death through traffic stops. And so I came across the driving equality ordinance and asked Local Progress, could they connect me with the person that started this? And so they were able to. And with the support of them and direct communication and working with Councilmember Isaiah Thomas in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, we were able to get the wording. We were able to get the legal help. We were able to get folks to look through state law and match it up with our municipal law in Memphis and be able to craft an ordinance that was particular to our city charter to be put forth to be passed. Um, and so that was pretty instant. And the only way that it was able to be that way is because Philadelphia did it first. Right, Councilmember Thomas in Philadelphia put in, over a year of hard work in trying to get it passed, trying to get the data, trying to get people on board, trying to make sure that it was sensical, and just so grateful that he had already done that framework, that building that foundation for this, so that I was able to pick it up without the mistakes he made, right? And see how can we tune this to Memphis so that it can stop future occurrences like the death of Tyree Nichols, which happened with a traffic stop.
What were, could you say a little bit more about any pitfalls that you maybe avoided based on the experience in Philadelphia, or just the kinds of help and advice that your colleague provided? And well, I mean, how much were you in touch? What how did
Yeah.
that work for kind of getting that, benefiting from
We
that
were talking
experience?
all the time. We were
Yeah.
talking, we were zooming, we were texting. They have a very more expanded team in Philadelphia than we do in Memphis. I have one staff member that does everything from constituent services to drafting resolutions to setting calendars. Councilmember Thomas had about 8 people and
Oh my
access
goodness.
to a legal team, and so I was just so it was very, very helpful that essentially they were able to bring to let me bring this to Memphis in a way that we both corroborated with making sure that it fit Memphis and Tennessee. But they did a lot of the heavy lifting because they had the capacity and they saw the impact that these national connections could show, and the same issues that we're seeing all across this country, right? So even though they did a whole lot of work to pass driving equality ordinance, there was a reason they passed it there, right? They were having issues with traffic stops. They were having problems with the police not retrieving from the cars what they thought they would when they stopped these people. They were having issues with um, feelings of racism guided towards folks who were stopped, black and brown people. So there was a reason they passed this ordinance. Um, and in Memphis, there was a reason we were looking. And it's not that we didn't have the same reasons they had, but we had the death of Tyree Nichols to speed that up into perspective, right? So working with them, talking with them, zooming with them, texting them. They were watching certain city council meetings and texting, in real time, trying to get understanding. We would debrief, right? I had to send our state law, our Tennessee annotated code to their legal team to review to make sure that we weren't saying anything illegal in my local ordinance, right? And stuff like that wouldn't have been able to happen unless that they were a partner.
That's where we should take a moment, and you can kind of flesh out my bare bones understanding of how a, a driving equality ordinance works, which is that it um, mandates police to not use pretextual well, just to not stop for minor things. So, but I should let you explain it better.
So yeah, so pretextual stops, and how we worded it in Memphis was, or how we clarified it in our ordinance, was secondary violations. So you being asked not to stop cars for secondary violations, which included broken tail light, obstruction in the window, alternative placement of your tags, expiration date of less than 30 days for your tags, or missing bumper. There were other elements that different groups wanted to add in Memphis, in which we had to compromise and talk about that. If we're wanting to get this passed with the council that had non-progressives and Republicans on it, even though we're nonpartisan, um, we had to compromise on what was included. And so, for example, I did not include tint as a reason not to stop. So that's not on there. I didn't include smell of marijuana. I didn't include that. I wanted to make sure that we got to issues that could be tied to poverty, or the lack of resources experienced by Memphians, and ones that we could mostly all agree on. And so it was the non inclusion of some controversial elements of the ordinance that was able to get it passed unanimously.
I saw in some of your media comments uh, a reference to the idea of poverty crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes bills are written just to get that last vote for a majority.
Yeah.
Uh, Talk a little bit, if you would, about, so you were going for unanimous vote as part of your strategy?
It
Or
wasn't
why
part of
would
the
you?
strategy, um, but it ended up being monumental for the passing of it. Um, Being a true progressive on the council, everything doesn't get unanimous votes. So my goal is to get it passed, right? It's to get 7 votes. However, I think that it just showed a moment of where Memphis was, a moment in time of where we were after Tyree Nichols, that it needed to be unanimous. And I didn't know that it was going to be that way. I didn't know that those who typically don't agree would see the necessity in this in the wake of this tragedy. And so I think that it being unanimous made it 10 times more momentous, um, than if it was just passed with 7 votes, very in having a bit of contention in there. So I didn't it wasn't my goal to get unanimous, but I think that consensus building is important when you're trying to do monumental legislation in whatever capacity that you're in. Does that mean you need to compromise the essence of what you're asking for? No. But that does mean that you need to try to get your colleagues to understand the reason and the context behind what you're doing, and to see the importance of why it needs to happen moving forward. So it wasn't my plan to get unanimous, but I'm much, much more glad that it was, looking back on it, than just having a very contentious vote. Because it makes it stronger when we're talking about it now. When we had to talk about it when the state brought it up in this year's legislature.
So we'll get to that next sad part of the story a little later on. The whole state legislature preemption agenda. Um, but of course, sure, to have it pass unanimously is a stronger statement of community values. It takes some of the politics out. I'm sure it doesn't take all the politics out.
Yes. So there was an intent to remove this ordinance from even happening. Um, our trying not to point the finger at anybody. There were a couple of ordinances that came out from different council members after the wake of Tyree Nichols, and there was an effort by particular people on the council to mold all of the ordinances into one, so that they would be in one package. They did that and presented it, but it left driving equality out. It didn't mention it. It didn't have an inkling to it. There was nothing about driving equality, pretextual stops, secondary violations, anything that had to do with the reason Tyree Nichols was stopped in the first place. And so this was a point in where I leaned heavily into the folks from Philly, because the person who was helping craft the ordinance, the combined ordinance, was the person that everybody looks to ensure that their ordinances are correct. So when I took my ordinance to them, they told me that it wasn't correct. So I took it to Philly and had their legal team look at it and vet it against state code. And I knew that it was a team of them. So I knew that these individuals weren't sending me, with faulty information into the council meeting. And so I returned with the ordinance, knowing that it was good, And I didn't give it to that person to check again. Because at this point, I already know that you don't, some for some reason driving equality is being redacted. So when the combined ordinance was introduced, I staunchly reintroduced and maintained that driving equality would be separate, because I know that if I didn't, it wouldn't have it wouldn't have been anywhere. It would have just disappeared as it did in the combined ordinance. And so I held it. So I didn't let it get introduced at the same time as the combined ordinance. I wanted it to have the attention it deserved. I wanted to have the conversation that it mandated from all folks on council, progressive, non-progressive, Republican, Democrat. I wanted to make people think and talk about it. And I wanted to make people decide. When if you say, yeah, we put everything in a combined ordinance, yeah, everybody, let's vote on it. Yes. All right, move on. Okay, this got to do with that too. Okay, well, yeah, move on. No, I wanted people to focus. And I also wanted people to see that it wasn't included in the combined ordinance intentionally, letting them connect the dots on that. So when the combined ordinance was introduced and accepted, a lot of people, folks on the ground and in these organizations said, well, wait, what happened to the driving equality? Why is it not in here? This doesn't mention traffic stops. And the people that did that combined ordinance couldn't answer that. And I said, again, when you try to build consensus, you try not to ostracize people or point the finger. So I just simply said, I'm holding mine for another meeting. It'll be back in 2 weeks. And that was also a way, like I said, to get people to focus. We're done with all those other ordinances, right? We think as a unit, as a 13 members, we think we've done enough, and that we're done with the aftermath of Tyree Nichols, but we're not, because you did not address the whole reason why we're in this predicament right now. And so now let's talk about it. Let's vote on it. And let's let everybody in Memphis and nationally and globally see how we respond to the reason. All of the other ordinances in the combined ordinance was after the fact. What to do if a police gets charged with this, what to do about their employment status or promotions or training. No, we're talking about being looking at things before they happen, right? I'm not talking about after the fact. We don't want to get to after the fact anymore. we want to stay we want to stay ahead of the game so we don't have to do this again. And so being able to hold that and being able to get Philadelphia to mesh it against the state was very key, was very crucial. Because it's hard to okay, if I make it myself, right? I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. Okay?
This
I can't
this
give
is
it.
like
Can't give it to you.
you had high quality, high powered outside counsel. Sounds like
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah. It was
Mhm.
a team of 4 lawyers for the city of Philadelphia that Councilmember Thomas, lent me.
And so you're making the case, as I hear it, you're from like a substance standpoint. You're saying, look, we're not dealing with how all this happens,
Hmm.
right? And how traffic stops, or just kind of these moments where escalation happens and violence. Um, and so it sounds like you decided from a process standpoint that you wanted to separate and have a time for focus on that piece. So politically, I assume like, so you messaged that. How did it land? Did it work out? Did it get you that space? Um, were you successful in drawing that contrast between what was in and what wasn't dealt with?
Yes. And I didn't message that. I didn't lay that out for my colleagues. I laid that out for some of the working organizations in the city, right? The folks who were also pushing for this, the folks who had some input. I was letting them know, the activists, of what I was doing.
Mhm.
As a as a council member, you don't
And
tell folks
did
what
they
you're gonna
echo
do.
that? Did that? I mean, so they're allies,
Yeah,
and they helped. Yeah.
yeah. So letting them know, because as I said, they looked at the combined ordinance and wondered where that part was. So I had to assure them, this is what we're gonna do. This is the path I'm gonna go, and it should be effective because it allows me for more time to get my colleagues to have to focus and discuss, and it allows you, for the activists, to be able to rally around one thing. So people think it's done and it's not. Now you're still asking folks to come out, to write letters, to do emails, to make phone calls, to leave voicemails, to do social media campaigns, do email campaigns around this one thing. So everybody's focusing, everybody's honing in. And I think that that helped it as well, because it's hard to ignore when originally it wasn't included in the combination ordinance. So it really was a good effort on both sides, on my end, on how I was approaching it, and then with the allies, with the activists in the city.
What were
And
some of the
it
best bits of advice that you got along the way there?
um media, how to position it in the media. I think that that helped as well. The folks in Philly helped a lot with that as well, strategizing combined press conferences to go through the information, right? The data, what driving equality is and what it isn't. And having somebody there, having one person there who's championing it, but also having somebody there who actually did it and is doing it, saying, yeah, what you think is wrong and this is what it is. Having that evidence right in front of you, broadcasted into media spaces everywhere, right, was just a way to not only help clear the water as far as correct information in Memphis, but also to keep this at a national focus. Because what we were doing was taking an effective legislative policy and fine tuning it due to this tragedy we had in Memphis. And so just not being caught up in the possibilities of it not working or not being effective, but really looking at how this is an opportunity to do better.
So, so the whole council is feeling that national spotlight and feeling on the spot for doing something, and
Yes.
that lasts not just for the initial days, couple weeks, but the months
Oh
following.
yeah. Yeah. And I think the driving equality ordinance, is what helped it last so long. So
So,
sorry to
so what
but yeah.
what were misperceptions? You talked about, what it is and what it isn't. What
Mhm.
were key misperceptions or misinformation that
We
you
had
that you really had to
had
bat down?
we had since COVID, we had an issue, still having an issue, but not as big as during COVID, with drag racing, with donuts, with stopping traffic to do certain things, which I know was a national phenomenon, right? It wasn't just us. And it was fear mongering, that this wouldn't catch the dangerous drivers, right? That you're essentially telling people to not pull over anybody. And it's not what we were saying at all, because that would be very irresponsible of a council person to say that. Especially one that votes on the budget of MPD and knows how much we're spending on first responders, and saying not to use them for what they're here for, which is to protect and serve in our communities. And so I'm just wanting them to better resource themselves. So why would I want you pulling over somebody for a bumper? That is not going to get you the criminals that you're searching for. It might get you people like me, my grandmother, someone that may be low resource, headed to work and not being able to fix that. You pulling over someone with who's not doing anything else, right? Who's not speeding, that's not swerving in and out of lanes, that's not making roll stops, that's not sitting without their seatbelt, right? Nothing that's dangerous. We're talking about secondary violations. Okay, so that's what it isn't. And being able to have evidence in the form of Councilman Thomas from Philadelphia to show what it isn't was very helpful. And doing that on a national scale continued the spotlight on us to ensure that people did not continue to promote that incitement of fear from proven lies.
So, did you start to have success in backing them down? Did the public debate get to a point where you really kind of blown a hole in
Not
what
at
the other
all.
side was saying?
Not at
They just
all.
kept hammering away at it.
Well, yes. So those media coverages, also with the help of the allies and the activists on the ground, helped ensure that the right story maintained in most places. Right. Of course, you have your random Facebook posts from certain people giving comments.
Mhm.
That's going to happen. But for the most part, media couldn't say what they knew not to be true anymore. So that quickly, it went away. It went away.
So when you talk about a unanimous council vote, I assume there's either somebody who's going to be the 13th or two people who are going to be the 12th and 13th or 11th, 12th and
Yeah.
13th, right? Um, what was there a process of kind of building towards 13, where you would get this one's support because of this, and another support because of something else?
No. Mm-mm. I wasn't giving out any
Yeah.
favors with
Hold on a
this.
second. Hold on. So, um, okay. This is a Wisconsin thing. We've got really strict open meetings laws.
Hmm.
Um, and, of course, we're allowed to talk to each other. Um, and we're allowed to talk to each other, particularly if we're like just developing new ideas, right? But when things get to the point that it's coming up on the agenda, we have to, stop. So I don't know whether you have those same kind of constraints, but are you saying you didn't know how people were lined up going into the vote?
No,
Really?
we have sunshine law. So yeah, we have heavy constraints. We call it sunshine law, but in the state of Tennessee, no local, of course, it's always the state doing something for the locals. No local elected representative, two or more, cannot discuss anything that will appear on a legislative agenda. right? Your face, right? Exactly. David, makes
Yeah,
no
yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah,
Because how can you get stuff
yeah.
done if you can't talk to each other, right? So you just have to know that you're putting out the right information. This is where lobbyists in Tennessee, municipal cities, have gotten plenty of money, right? Because now they're the mediator, now they're the middleman. So, David, you're a lobbyist, and I'm telling you what I want a council person to do, and you go talk to them, and then you charge me for it later. Right?
On a less kind of fancy and high paid basis, it goes for your allies too, right? Um, they can talk to as many
Yeah,
council members as they want.
but not at the same time. So we can't be in
Right,
a
right,
yeah. So we
right.
can't be in a
But they
plan.
can count the noses, uh, and they
Mm.
hadn't. Well, so I guess I'm inferring that that puts it on you to just make this the strongest draft ordinance you possibly can, huh?
Right. Right. Which is why I couldn't leave it in the hands of just the people in our office. Yeah. I didn't want it to be sabotaged.
And so some of the choices about um, what was counted as secondary, what was on the list of things you can't stop for,
Hmm.
some items being left off, like marijuana smell.
Right.
Um,
Right. I knew
uh,
that certain people wouldn't vote for it if it had that on there.
so, what were some you've referred to both Tennessee law and the city's charter? What were the provisions that had to be in alignment with that? What were the
So
specifics for to tailor it to your legal situation?
currently, well, then while doing it, state law says that you can cite tickets for those items. And so if our ordinance would have said don't do that, that's directly against state law, which is illegal. So it was simply requesting for the redirection of resources as in officers to not do this so that they can focus on other stuff. So suggestion essentially. Um, so that it
And
would
so
not
and
go
so
against state law.
and an ordinance was determined to be an appropriate way to give that guidance to the officers in the field.
Yes. Yes. So that that information could be then taken by the chief and done in however way that she was going to disseminate that information to the officers.
So before the Tennessee state legislature, in its wisdom, blows this up, which happened just last month. Um, there was the better part of a year that it was in place. Could you say a bit about how implementation worked and how it went?
The
And
mayor refused. He refused to sign it. The mayor refused to sign it, which when the mayor refuses to sign an ordinance, it goes into effect after 60 days automatically. The police chief said that she drafted a memo that was read and said to all precincts at the start of every day that included this information. However, the accompanying data portion did not get implemented as did not get implemented. And so we don't even have data to how that panned out for that half of year last year.
did you get word of mouth reports? That sounds good. If the guidance is driven home on a daily basis. I don't know, or maybe it could just be lip service, but um,
Mhm.
deprived of the real data, like you were, obviously unfortunate. Um, were you able to get a sense of the impact and whether it was cutting down on the stops?
I wasn't. What some of the allies were doing on the ground were just putting out online campaigns asking for stories and feedback from citizens. Right? Have you still been stopped for this after this ordinance? So they were looking for ways to collect information because we didn't have that data ordinance being backed up by the city. And they found a couple. I remember reading a few, but it wasn't overwhelming. But that's not to say what happened or not, because that's them reaching out for information versus having a reputable way to really collect that type of data that's needed to make that determination.
Uh, did those reports from your allies show that some precincts were abiding by it better than others?
It wasn't, they were asking about just the MPD as a whole and not the
Hmm.
precincts. So yeah, so we wouldn't have known about precincts.
So yes, we've alluded to it a few times, um, but the Tennessee legislature, and this happens on a lot of issues, preempted local control over this and enacted a state law um, prohibiting uh, local jurisdictions from enacting driving equality. Um, I'm sure that was a fight itself.
Yeah. The parents of Tyree Nichols who signed off on my ordinance, they went to the Tennessee legislature to lobby that this bill not be passed. And the Speaker of the House told Tyree Nichols' parents that they would hold off on voting. And the day that Tyree Nichols' parents didn't show, which was the next day, they called for the vote anyway. Right?
The same, right?
How
The same
ridiculously
legislature that
disrespectful.
we all saw how they
Yeah,
treated the Justins. Right?
right. But we're talking about the parents of this man
Lying to their face.
literally lying to their face. Not that they
Yeah.
showed up in the audience. They had a personal meeting with him,
No
with Cameron
shame.
Sexton, and they voted anyway as soon as they weren't there. And I mean, they've done so much ridiculous stuff that being on a list of things is right on brand for the Tennessee legislature. They are a super majority Republican, ridiculous Republicans, and the stuff that they've been doing the whole session has just been absurd.
Do
Um,
they go in total lockstep? I mean, I'm old
yeah,
enough to
yeah.
remember a thing that we used to call moderate Republicans, and I am aware that
I think after
they,
Trump in the South, that's kind
right,
of went away
right, right.
for the most part. But yeah, they're pretty much lock and step.
So
We
what does
we
that
don't
leave
have
you?
enough as far as Democrats in the state of Tennessee. If all the Democrats in the Tennessee state legislature never showed up, it wouldn't even matter. That's how
They'd meet
little we don't
they'd meet
have.
the majority meets quorum
Oh yeah, yeah, way over
Mhm.
quorum. So it's I don't envy the Shelby County representatives who are Democratic, who are in our Tennessee legislature, because they have a hard job. They have a hard job.
Um, so, so what do you do? The problem remains. I wanted to make sure to make mention. The U.S. Department of Justice is looking at the Memphis police for patterns in practice. Um, they legislature just baldly uh, took away the lever that was most helpful.
Yeah,
What alternatives do you have?
we're thinking about that. Legislature just ended yesterday, so now it's the what do you do next? And so, folks on the ground, I've tapped Philly and then just thinking myself about next steps. So I don't have that for you right now, um, but definitely trying to see what's the best and legal way to go about it.
And when the federal government is looking at your your police department, um, is council kept apprised, or
We can't
do you,
discuss it. We can't discuss it.
yeah.
No, we're
Um,
right there.
well, so you've been through this intense experience, obviously the terrible um, experience for your community, for the Nichols family, um, and then you had this intense experience as a legislator. And before we finish, I wanted to make sure and ask, um, you know, key lessons or reflections uh, on the work that you did on the issue and pushing it. And I can only imagine that it taught you a lot as a political leader.
Oh, definitely, definitely. One of the main ones is how important coalition is, and not just coalition through, your colleagues, but coalition through allies, through people on the ground, and not being afraid to reach out for help. A lot of times progressives, our mindset, we aren't thinking in silos. Somebody else has probably thought about that same thing because we're thinking in a different way than some of our colleagues. So reaching out for help to continue to build different types of coalitions, right, to be able to bring what you need to bring to your jurisdiction, and being welcoming and open to that type of help, resource, in working through. Hopefully, I'm in Memphis, you're in Wisconsin. I got help from Philly. Hopefully this podcast will help somebody, right?
Also, um, you talked on coalitions. You talked about how much you were in touch with counterparts in Philadelphia. I am guessing that you were in that kind of uh, regular, if not constant, contact with your local allies as well,
Oh yeah, yeah,
and
definitely.
the relationships that you have must, uh, I imagine, be that much stronger.
Yeah, you got to leave the party with who you came with, right? So you can't get in office and forget about the people who helped you get there, because these are the people who helped me get elected, right? So I'm gonna come with you when I need you, and I'm gonna be here when you need me. Um, and if I'm forgetting about that, what type of representative would I be? Right? So definitely.
Wise words and words to live by, and I look forward to following your your future endeavors. Congratulations again, Dr. Easter-Thomas.
Thank you,
Um,
and
and
congratulations on
and
the finishing of
thank you
your
so
8
much
years.
for doing this. I really appreciated this conversation. It was great, and I look forward to sharing it with our audience.
Yeah, I look forward to as well. Thanks for inviting me on, David.